we used to work in a wind tunnel, and if the Formula One team was in testing, there'd be a big red card on the door and you weren't allowed in. And of course, you'd find some reason to sneak in. And I remember getting caught once by one of the guys that ran the wind tunnel, and he said, "What are you doing, Grant? What are you up to?" And he opened my notebook, and it was full of CVs that I was hoping to hand out to, I think it was Benetton were in. I was hoping to hand them out to Benetton. But eventually, lots of applying for jobs, lots of rejections. I think I had about 100 rejection letters that I've still got. I got offered a job at Cosworth as a Formula One engine designer, and that's where it all really started.
Welcome to this episode of the Driven Engineers podcast. Today, I'm joined by Matt Grant from Modatek, a specialist engineering business with deep roots in high-performance engine technology and a long-standing partnership with Cosworth. Modatek is trusted by engineers and race teams around the world for genuine Cosworth engine parts, remanufacturing, and reverse engineering. With access to over 250,000 original Cosworth drawings, they help keep some of motorsport's most iconic engines alive. In this episode, we will talk about Matt's background, the craftsmanship and precision behind remanufacturing performance engines, and what it means to carry forward the legacy of one of motorsport's most respected names. So let's get into it. Hi, Matt. Good morning. How are you?
Hello, Matt. Thank you for that introduction. I might use all those words on our website. They sound pretty good.
You're welcome. I'll send it over afterwards.
Thank you.
Great to meet you. I always think it's best for our guests to give a little bit of an introduction themselves. So maybe you could just let our listeners know who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I run a company called Modatek with my wife, Diana, and we specialise in selling Cosworth engine parts, historic engine parts, but we also do reverse engineering for customers, design consultancy, and then I write technical articles, mainly for race engine technology. But my history has been, as you said, Cosworth. So I spent 17 years at Cosworth in Formula One mainly, and then set up Modatek about 10 years ago. So that's me.
Fantastic. We'll get into the Cosworth piece shortly because we're really interested to hear about that. So let's start right at the beginning of your career. What initially drew you to engineering, and how did you get your foot in the door of Cosworth in the mid-90s?
It's a very long story, so I'm not sure how long we've got, but I don't know why I like engineering or cars especially. There was no background when I was growing up. My family weren't into cars. One of my brothers started stripping Morris Marinas. That shows you how long ago it was. And I helped him do that for a couple of times. But that was it really. I didn't really get much exposure to cars, but I just was mad about them from the age of 2 or 3. And my earliest memories are just doodling cars and the smell and the noise. And then when I was about 12, I suddenly discovered Formula One, or it wasn't a sort of thing back then you could just go and find, but it was very much one of those sports that you had to go and seek out. So that made it worth it. And again, I'm so old that there wasn't really much coverage on TV. I remember once watching a race in the mid-80s when halfway through the race they stopped it and they said, "We're now going to cut to Cran Green bowling at Brighton or something." And you had to read the results in the newspaper the next day. That's how bad it was. And in fact, you had to phone up. There's a number you could phone to get results, the top 6, a premium rate number, which my mum got very cross with, and I had to go and use the local phone box with lots of 10p's and a notepad. So there was no real sort of way of following Formula One. But I knew probably at that age I wanted to become a racing car designer. That was the thing that I really wanted to do. And I went to school. There was nobody to talk to. We had a careers advisory service, which was the metalwork teacher, and he obviously didn't want to do the careers advisory bit, but you had to go in and see him before you left the school. And I sat down with him and he said, "What do you want to be?" And I said, "I want to be a racing car designer." And he types it into this huge computer and the dot matrix printer whirs to life and it comes out and he says, "You're going to be a postman." And I said, "Why am I going to be a postman?" He said, "Well, that's the nearest thing in the alphabet to a racing car designer." So that was it. So what I decided to do, I thought I'll write to all the teams. So back then Autosport used to list out all the addresses of the teams. So I wrote to every Formula One team and I got replies from most of them. Some were pretty good. Some, I remember McLaren told me to join their fan club. But I got replies from people like Ross Brawn and Alan Jenkins, who were both sort of just coming up through the industry. And they all told me, go to university, get a degree in engineering. I went to Reading University, did mechanical engineering, which is a fantastic time. And part of the projects we called it a third year project, which was more of a dissertation. And I was lucky enough to get in with Team Lotus, and we worked on the design of the radiators. So I spent quite a long time working with them. And I think I was supposed to do a 20,000 word essay, and it ended up at 60,000 words. And I just, there was nothing I could take out. We were just so good. At the end of it, I hoped to get a job there. And I said to them, if I do well, will you give me a job? They said, yeah. So when I finished my degree and graduated, and I rang them up and said, I'm ready now. And they said, well, the guy you worked with has left. He's gone to another team and nobody else has ever heard of you here. And so I was like, okay, this is welcome to Formula One, dropped in it. So I managed to get a job at a company called MIRA, which is the Motor Industry Research Association, which if you drive along the A5 through Nuneaton, you'll see the front of their building still. And again, it was such an amazing company to work for. I spent 4 years there, followed the IMECI Monitor Professional Development Scheme, which was a really good scheme to get you through engineering into a company, and you assigned a mentor. So I had one of the professors there who was my mentor, and I spent 4 years still applying to Formula One teams. I ended up working in the wind tunnel, and we were quite bad. We used to work in the wind tunnel, and if a Formula One team was in testing, there'd be a big red card on the door and you weren't allowed in. And of course, you'd find some reason to sneak in. And I remember getting caught once by one of the guys that ran the wind tunnel, and he said, "What are you doing, Grant? What are you up to?" And he opened my notebook, and it was full of CVs that I was hoping to hand out to, I think it was Benetton we're in. I was hoping to hand them out to Benetton. Eventually, lots of applying for jobs, lots of rejections. I had about 100 rejection letters that I've still got. I got offered a job at Cosworth as a Formula One engine designer, and that's where it all really started.
Brilliant. Your resilience really paid off then. All that applying and actually not backing down was probably testament to you getting the role at Cosworth in the end.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Tell us about your time at Cosworth then. Your role as an engine designer. You've got to work on the Formula One program at Cosworth. Tell us about that, and tell us what it was like back.
So it was a brilliant time to join Formula One because there were no rules really, essentially, that we have today. So as anything goes, you can come up with all sorts of crazy things. I think the only limit was really engine capacity. You weren't tied down to a V10 or a V8, so you could come up with any scheme you like. And I started, and again, all credit to Cosworth, because I probably didn't know anything about engines when I started, I must confess. And they took us, there were a few of us like me in the same boat, and they took us all on and trained us up in how to design engines, how to build engines. But you were very much dropped in at the deep end. I think the first thing I did was the conrod for the 98 Formula One engine, and it was like, here you go and design it, off you go. We started on drawing boards, so again, showing my age. And the first week at Cosworth was doing lettering. You had to do the alphabet until your alphabet looked like everyone else's, and then you were given the official Cosworth film that you could draw onto. But again, I think that was a really good experience doing 2D drawing. Sadly, we don't do it today as much, and drawing boards were really good back then to sort of lay ideas out on. But yeah, so gradually I just got more and more parts to design, and I ended up working in what they called it the bottom end group, which was everything below the head gasket, basically. So my specialism became crankshafts. I think I got known as Widow Cranky at some point. And I was just doing cranks all the time. Said, can I do something else? And eventually they let me go into other areas. So I started doing installation work with teams. So you go along to the factory. So it would have been Stuart Grand Prix or Jaguar Racing. You go along, sit down with their designers and come up with how the engine's installed in the car. And then you get to work alongside Formula One teams, which I found actually to be more enjoyable than working in a Formula One team, because you don't have the horrendous work shift patterns that Formula One teams have, but you get to see it from the outside and you get to be a part of it.
That's brilliant. So when did you decide you wanted to move into projects and operations management, and what skills helped you make that transition, Matt?
I think it was really just, I quite liked doing doing the other stuff outside of designing. And the great thing at Cosworth was that you were told, you have to go off and speak to the production engineers to make sure bits can be made, and you have to go and speak to purchasing to make sure bits can be bought, and then you speak to engine builders, and you get involved with the whole life cycle of the component. And I quite enjoyed doing that side of things. And so I got more and more involved in helping to run the projects. And then eventually, they sort of say, well, would you like to be the project manager for something else? And it was outside of Formula One, actually, the first project management jobs I did. So when Cosworth had pulled out of Formula One in the end of 2006, I got to work. We created a project management group, and I started to manage some of the manufacturing projects going through, and then ended up managing one of the larger sort of projects. We called it the Delta project. I was the project manager for that. And then when Cosworth came back into Formula One in 2010, I was the project manager for the return.
Brilliant. You mentioned the Deltec project there. We should talk about that, really. It was a fascinating crossover between motorsport and heritage engineering. What was your approach to reverse engineering?
It was kind of a weird project in the sense it was quite unique. I don't think I'd ever get to do it again. But the Deltic engine, which for those people that know, is this huge opposing pistons engine that was used in trains, but it's also used in minesweepers. And Rolls-Royce had the contract to build these engines, maintain these engines, and they lost a lot of stock in a warehouse fire. And so they came to Cosworth to say, well, look, we know about your engineering expertise. Can you help us reverse engineer and remanufacture all these parts that we've lost in the fire? And so it was very much on insurance claims, it's very much a like-for-like basis. So you can only claim back what you've lost in the fire. So they said, well, here's all the stuff we've lost, and we need it all remanufacturing, but it has to be exactly as it was. We can't improve any parts. Even things like the paint has to be the same color that was used. So it was a real sort of exercise in reverse engineering historic parts. The great thing about that project was that they had still contact with all the original design, or some of the original designers. It was these designs, so there were still a few people that could help out, and they had all the drawings. So we had lots of 2D drawings. So my job initially was to help get the 2D drawings turned into 3D CAD models. So we employed lots of contractors to help us just churn out lots of CAD models, but then also starting to talk to manufacturing companies. Some of them were the original suppliers and some were brand new companies. And obviously we had to keep the parts the same, but the way we made them, we could do anything we like. So we started looking at new technologies that we could use. So things like 3D printing, sound cores, and all the things that we could do to speed up manufacturing or to make it, exactly as it was made originally. And I just found that whole process to be amazing. You uncover a huge cottage industry of engineering companies that are still out there that can make these parts. It was just an eye-opener for me.
That's brilliant. That's really good insights, and appreciate you sharing that with us. Staying with Cosworth, obviously played a big part in the return to Formula One in 2010. Could you talk to us about what your role was at that time, Matt, and what role you played in the comeback at the time?
Yeah, I don't want to big myself up because I was very much a small cog in a big organization. But when we came back in was probably middle of 2009 when it all started up again. And you have to remember, end of 2006, Cosworth pulled out, so everything was mothballed. A lot of people left, so we had to get everything back. And it wasn't just a case of, you're going to supply a team. We had 4 new teams, so we had Virgin, Caterham, HRT or Hispania Racing, and then also USF1. We were still working with them. And then we got Williams, which is, oh my gosh, there's a huge works team coming up now as well that we've got to supply engines to. And we were talking to another team, so there could have been another team. So we were gearing up for 6 teams. So suddenly you're going from nothing to we've got to make engines for 6 teams. And the one good thing was that the CA engine, which ran in 2006, was such a fantastic engine. The team that worked on it did an amazing job. It was the only engine that could rev to 20,000 RPM for the entire race distance. So the rules, by the time we came back, were you reduce the revs to 18,000. So suddenly you've got that factor of safety built in. There were still lots of niggling issues that we had to overcome, but we were starting with a great product, so it wasn't a case of having to redesign it from scratch. But it was still the same as we had with the Deltic. We've got to go out and find loads of suppliers again. We've got to reestablish our relationships with those suppliers. We've got to recruit people, and we managed to get quite a few people come back. But also we took a lot of people from other teams or other industries, and that really helped because we suddenly you start to learn about how other companies work and how they would go about doing their motorsport projects. So that was a really good experience. And then we just had to get on with it, really. I think we built 50 engines in that winter for what was winter testing. So back then, I think there was sort of 3 weeks of winter testing. So we had to build 50 engines. And like I said, we were geared up. Probably by that point, we'd lost the sixth team, but we were still 4 new teams in Williams. USF1 dropped out. They kept us honest to the last day. They sent representatives over to say, where's our engines? We want to see the engines. So we had to make sure we weren't the reason why they couldn't go racing. And I remember my boss, Mark Gallagher, said to me, we just want to be the least of their problems. So when they start, especially the new teams, when they start building the cars, they just need to make sure there's an engine there. They don't want to be on the phone ringing us up saying, where's our engine? Why doesn't it fit? What's gone wrong here? So that was our approach. And I think it was really good how, we got to work with these new teams and bring them up. Sadly, none of them are around today, but, I think the people that were part of the team are still very much in the industry. So I think we did ourselves great credit. And we went into that first race. We supplied a third of the grid with engines. So it was a great honour to see that come out and come to fruition.
That's brilliant. You mentioned the people there as well, and some of the people that were working for those teams at the time. But I want to kind of concentrate on the people that you worked with at Cosworth. I'm sure you worked with some brilliant engineers. Are there any people that really stand out to you, or anybody you kind of really looked up to or saw as a mentor at your time at Cosworth?
I think there were so many great people and talented people. I could sort of, I've lost count of how many talented engineers I sat next to and worked with, were far cleverer than me, and probably more hardworking than me. Are just incredible people that have all gone off to do amazing things, and some of them have gone on to become, technical directors or team bosses or whatever. But I think in my time at Cosworth, when I first started, there was Rob White was my chief engineer, and he's now at Cadillac. And then Nick Hayes was our technical director. So those two really taught me a lot about how to stay calm under pressure. And very early days at Cosworth, I didn't know what I was doing, and quite clearly, they were there to help guide us along. And when things went wrong, it wasn't a case of, oh, you idiot, what have you done? It was sit down, let's work out what's gone wrong, let's find a plan to get it back on track. And I think that calmness is the thing that you really need when it all goes to pear-shaped. Because if you're all running around like headless chickens, you're just going to get in a worse state. So it's the Keith Duckworth principle, which is understand the first principles. Why has it failed? What can we do? Going back to first principles to understand this problem, and then let's introduce a series of measures that we can resolve it to. And that's what those guys taught me. Sadly, I only met Keith a couple of times. I would have loved to have spent more time with him. He's definitely, without knowing it, he was probably a great influence on my career.
How did you get involved in managing Cosworth's historical archives then, and why is that history important to preserve?
So I mean, I have to admit, probably my first few years at Cosworth, I didn't really care much about the historic side because we were so focused on let's go racing, what's next year's engine, what are we doing next. But probably sort of when we returned to Cosworth, and if you look at the books, we lost a team every year. Basically, we started with 5 teams, went to 4, and then we were losing a team every year. So I had a bit of capacity. And there was a lovely chap called Pete Mace, who'd been an engine builder at Cosworth and had come back to sort out the drawing archive. And I walked past one day and I said to Pete, what are you doing? And he said, I'm just going through all these drawings. I said, well, I can give you a hand if you like. So between us, started sorting out all the drawings, and I just started. It's amazing once you start looking at them. It's you could spend a day just going through a pile of drawings. We found schemes that Keith Duckworth had done for the Lotus 49 and the DFE, and there were doodles that him and Colin Chapman had passed back and forth, with their writing on, and should we put the suspension mount here, and how big should we make the conrod bolt, all those sorts of little doodles and questions that they were asking each other. And I just found that just mesmerizing, and you get sucked into it. And then I started also helping out with the sale of historic parts. So again, because we were making CA, the Formula One engines, we could make, DFE parts, or we could make parts for other historic engines at the same time. So I started getting involved with that side as well.
You may have touched on it slightly there, but what inspired you to go ahead and leave Cosworth and start Modatek?
I didn't really get a choice because sadly, 2013, end of 2013, the new rules came out that it was a V6 turbo, and there was no way, Cosworth could do that without the huge financial backing. So sadly, I got made redundant at the end of 13, but we left on good terms, and I wanted to do contracting work. So I thought, well, I'll have to set up a company. So that's where Modatek came from, as a sort of a company, so I could do contract work. But what happened was that people I'd been working with on historic stuff started ringing me up saying, can you help supply these parts still? And I said, well, I don't work at Cosworth. They said, well, can you do it through your new company? And I said, well, yeah, I'd love to. So I spoke to Cosworth, and they said, yeah, that's fine. We'll support you. And it's a great outlet for them, to channel their historic activities through. And then that's how it started. And thankfully, they had faith in Modatek when we started off, and have been behind us ever since in terms of supporting their historic parts supply.
Is it fair to say that your long-standing time at Cosworth and knowledge of the engine programs helped you build that credibility for Modatek in the early days?
Yeah, definitely. I think people knew, hopefully some people knew who I was or what I was doing. And I could say, well, look, I worked on this engine, or I've worked with people who worked on this engine, so we know what we're talking about. And I think as well, the other thing was that we always understood their demands. So today we work with historic customers. You would think, oh, it's an easy job, building historic engines. They're under as much pressure as we were building them back in the day in terms of deadlines. They've got customers that want to go racing. There'll be all sorts of financial reasons why they have to have engines built on a certain time. And so we have to match that demand, and we have to understand that, if they say, well, I've got a customer that wants to go testing in a week's time, we've got to get those bits to them. And it's the same approach today that we took back when we were supplying F1 engines, that in the sense that we have to be there, we have to be the least of their problems in a sense.
Yeah. So that's great. What does a typical day look like at Modatek when you wake up and when you leave at the end of the day? Talk us through what a standard day looks like, if you can. It might not be. It might be different every day, I imagine.
It is still quite varied, which is quite nice. Most of the time, it's probably quoting. I spend an inordinate amount of time either handling inquiries where people say, have you got this, have you got that, and then quoting. So there'll be an element of still reverse engineering, so I'll still recreate the CAD models or get someone to help me do that, and then we'll then turn that into drawings, send it off to suppliers, and then we're handling the quotes from the suppliers or with Cosworth to try and put together the prices. That's probably, anyone running a small business will know that's your bread and butter. If you don't do that, you're not going to exist. So we have to spend a lot of time doing that. But then I still do contracting work, so design consultancy work for customers. So they'll come to me with a problem, an engineering problem, and I get to hopefully use some of my skills and experience and help them understand problems. Or if they're designing a brand new engine, I'll be a part of that team to help design a new engine. And then also, as you said, writing. So I write for Race Engine Technology, and I've been doing that for about 10 years. And so that work kind of comes in blocks, and I get to spend a couple of days being a technical journalist and then go back to my day job.
That's really good. Can you tell us, you don't have to give us the details, but can you tell us the kind of clients or projects that you're working with or who you have worked with?
Yeah, it's so varied. We go from one-man bands, I call them Fred and the Sheds, right through. We work with a couple of Formula One teams on current parts for their cars. So it's so varied, the customer base that we have. The great thing is we always say to people, we have probably an 80% return from customers. So we develop really good relationships with some of our customers, so they keep coming back because they know, the good service, I hope, that we supply. So there isn't really a sort of a typical customer out there, but what we try and do, we treat every customer equally. So whether it's an O-ring or it's an entire engine rebuild kit, we'll hopefully give them the same level of service that they want. And it can be that O-ring could be the thing that stops that £1 million car from running. So that O-ring is as equally important as the larger part. So we try and recognise that and make sure they all get the same level of service.
Fantastic. And I think that's so important in today's market, isn't it? Like you say, treating everybody the same. That's great. Is there a particular Cosworth engine that you get the most inquiries about?
Yeah, it probably is the YB, which was the engine that went in the Escort and the Sierras in the 80s and early 90s. And that's probably because they made 35,000 of them back in the day. And there's plenty of people out there still running them. And the groups as well. There's so many groups that people belong to. We work with a group called the Cosworth Drivers Club. I'm sure they'd be glad if I give them a name check. But they have about 80,000 members now. And a lot of those members drive YB engines. So that's probably the most common. DFE as well. From a personal point of view, I think it's an amazing engine, so I like working on it, and we help people with that. And then right through to the most recent engines we support are the CA, so the one that I just mentioned that ran in 06 and then 10 to 13. And then the CK and the TJ, which were the earlier variants, so the V8s and the V10s that ran before it. They are just, again, a joy to work on because I can remember designing bits for them originally, and the customers are really great. That they understand what we're doing, and being a part of an engine program for an engine that revs to 17 or 20,000 RPM is still quite exciting.
That's great. Mentioned the Cosworths there, the Sierra Cosworth and the Escort Cosworth. I saw Cosworth go through an auction. I think it was a Sierra Cosworth go through an auction recently for a mind-blowing amount of money.
Yeah.
Are you seeing a growing demand for preserving and restoring these we see them as classic cars now?
Yeah, we are, because I think people realise that it's no good just having a car and sticking it in a bubble and then leaving it. I think they appreciate that if you're going to have the car, the very least you have to do is drive it occasionally. Some people use them to compete in, and I think that's really good. And to do that, they recognise that they need the best parts. I think we get customers sometimes that will, say, well, actually, we're not worried about the provenance of a part, but most of our customers say, actually, no, we want genuine Cosworth parts, or we want something that's better made than it was originally. And that's definitely going up. And our customer base is growing as people learn about what we do. So we're seeing more inquiries coming in, and hopefully we're getting more parts sent out.
Brilliant. You've worked across F1, IndyCar, Le Mans, road car projects. Is there one that's really sort of stood out that's been the most technically demanding?
I think Formula One will always be that just because, even though probably technically, in the sense it's not, there's engine programs that are as complicated as a Formula One engine program, but it's that exposure that you get. The fact that there's, back when I was, looking after the project management side, there was 300 million people watching a race that they said was televised, and it's probably gone up today by another factor, but that public exposure means that you're always under pressure to perform. I think for some of the other series you mentioned, Le Mans and IndyCar, again, they are equally technically very complicated. And just because of the nature of racing, because people know that if I can make a part lighter, then it might, give me some more revs, or it might give me some more power. How can we make it lighter, or we can do these materials, or we can introduce new systems. And I think that's the fascination with motorsport, is it's always pushing on.
We mentioned your resilience earlier on at the beginning of your career, getting those CVs out to as many teams as you could and just keep trying and not giving up. What other skills are timeless for young engineers looking to work in F1 or high performance environments, do you think?
I think the biggest one I always say to people is enthusiasm. So you've got to be enthusiastic about the subject. And there will be times when it really tests your patience and you think, why on earth are we doing this? And when I've sort of spoken to hopefully young engineers that want to come into motorsport, I've said, be enthusiastic. We can teach you the skills, but we can't teach you the enthusiasm. You've got to have that already. And the other important thing is to understand not just the subject you're going into, but what's going on around it. And I heard, I can't remember who it was, but said there's like a T-shape skills matrix, or shape, if you like, that you should have. So you've got your discipline that you drive into that you know a lot about, but going across the top are all the other disciplines that you should have at least an understanding of. In the case of engines, like I said, I knew a lot about cranks, but I started to learn about other areas of the engine and about how the projects are run. And I think that was really helpful for me. And if you look, I always quote Adrian Newey. Some people say they've never heard of him, which is quite scary. But Adrian Newey is a classic example. A great aerodynamicist, obviously, probably one of the best, but he also knows an awful lot about other parts of the engine and about the other parts of the car. And I've briefly sort of crossed paths with him a couple of times, and you're amazed at how much he actually knows about how the car itself is performing. And that's why I think personally that's why he's won so many championships, because he understands the other areas of the car, not just his own speciality.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Really good advice. You mentioned earlier on that you've been doing some writing for almost 10 years as well for high power media and race engine technology. How do you approach explaining some of those complex engineering topics for the broader audience? How do you, I guess it's layman terms in some respects, but how do you approach that?
Yeah, it is. I try and imagine myself from 25 years ago reading the article and thinking, well, would I have understood it, not knowing what I know now? And so I sometimes look at it like that. Sometimes as well, I mean, we work with lots of companies that help us with the articles. They sort of give us lots of information that's really useful. And so sometimes they've already, made it idiot proof for me. So it's trying to take that information and then present it in a way to the readers that they can sort of follow through. I have to say as well, at High Power Media, Race Engine Technology, there's a team of people that also work on the articles, that check them, that go through them, and will raise clarifications and say, well, what did you mean by this? So there's a team of people that support me writing the article.
Looking back at your career, not saying you're at the end of your career now by saying it that way, but
Thank you.
what's been your proudest career moment so far to date?
I think it probably was the first F1 engine that I really got involved with, which was called the CK, which came out in '99. And again, like I said, there was a group of us that really, needed to learn an awful lot in a very short time, and we all worked together on this engine. And I think the stuff we did was amazing. The way we'd come up with new ideas, and again, credit to the management. They let us do these crazy things. And I still look on that engine. We took something like 30 kilos out from the previous engine design back when there was no minimum weight limit. So we knew that we were doing something well. And then the engine, it went into the Stewart car, which was a great car. So it won a race and got a couple of poles. So I think that really helped sort of turn Cosworth around in terms of its Formula One performance. So yeah, so that's probably my favourite engine, and that's probably the best projects I've been able to work on.
Brilliant. Were there any decisions in your career, either within the projects or any of the companies that you might have worked for, that felt risky at the time but actually paid off in the long run?
Yeah, I think whenever you have a career transition, whenever you change jobs, there's always an element of, well, I'm not sure I should be doing this. I think leaving Myra was a difficult choice because, I probably could still be there today. I loved working there, but I just had that need to work in Formula One. And then again, obviously setting up Modatek was a bit of a risk in the sense that, becoming self-employed is never an easy choice, and there's lots of risks. I was lucky I could de-risk it by doing the contract work to start with. And then my wife obviously supported me, and we worked together creating this company. But I think that was always a bit of a, what if it goes wrong moment? What are we going to do? So yeah, there's always an element of risk and worry when you do that.
It's great, and it's great to hear that you've come quite far with it, and you've gone through some patches like the COVID and things like that as well, which I'm sure might have been testing at the time. So, okay, 30 years engineering career. How do you stay motivated? What wakes you up every morning to keep you going?
Yeah, it's just the new technology that's constantly coming up. It's, and you think, oh, that's it now, we can't do anything better. But then you get 3D printing, or additive manufacturing as it's called. And now we've got AI, you get things like generative design, where, AI systems can take apart and design it and give you the design. I don't see it as a threat to our jobs. I think it's something that we use as a tool. So you still need somebody driving it that knows what the part's going to look like. But you get these incredible designs that come out. A few years ago, I worked on a thing called drawingless models, basically. So you replace 2D drawings with a 3D model that had all of the information built in. And those sorts of systems, those sorts of ways that we can go about manufacturing are really exciting. That will speed up manufacturing time. So there's just a constant push in technology and in the way we do things that I think, that's not unique to motorsport, but motorsport is very much the cutting edge. And again, I just love seeing the competition. I still follow Formula One and still have my favorite teams, and I see them do well. And I think it's a great, still going great.
We get a lot of young listeners on the podcast, people that are graduates or looking to start a career in motorsport or automotive engineering. What one piece of advice can you give them?
Can I give more than one?
Yeah,
I
please.
think, well, obviously, as you said, don't take no for an answer. Just keep on applying, but also build up your list of contacts. So, like I said, I had to write to everybody from the back of Autosport. Today, we have things like LinkedIn. Get in touch with people, just connect up to them. I'm more than happy if people connect up to me and ask me questions. And it's the same for most people that have worked in the sport for a while. And don't be ashamed, don't be afraid, to go to some people you think would never answer you. You've got nothing to lose, what's the worst that can happen? So drop them messages or ask them questions. And most people are more than happy to help out. And then, like I said before, don't be afraid to change tact and learn that skills matrix. Have the other skills across the top of your matrix that you can call on. I never wanted to design engines when I first started. I wanted to design cars. And I think I probably wanted to be an aerodynamicist to start with. But then I started getting into engines and found I really loved it. So you just have to be adaptable sometimes. Yeah, and just keep pushing, just keep trying.
That's really good advice. Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. I feel like we could just go on for so much longer. And perhaps we might need to make a part 2 with you in another series later down the line, because I just feel that we're only kind of scratching the surface with your career and what you can share with us. We're going to leave it there. I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know how busy you are, and for sharing some of those insights to the industry with our listeners. Hopefully we can speak to you again soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, thank you. It's been an honour. Thank you very much.